We're now live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Council Rock Education Committee meeting of February 18th, 2021. We have just one agenda item tonight, and that is a discussion of elementary virtual Wednesdays. If we could, I know it's difficult with Zoom, but if we could take a moment, please, to introduce ourselves, let everyone know who's attending the meeting. Thank you.
This is Mike Thorward, School Director.
This is Kristen Marcel, School Director.
Andy Block, School Director.
Ed Tate, School Director.
Denise
Joe
Brooks.
Hidalgo.
Oh,
Sorry, Denise, go ahead.
and then Denise Brooks, School Board.
Joe Hidalgo, School Board.
It's Element School Board.
Mark Bialik, School Board.
Robert Frazier, Superintendent.
Susan Elliott, Assistant Superintendent.
Andy Sanko, Director of K-12 Education. Matt Frederickson, IT Director.
And Mary Ann McKee, School Board. Thank you, everyone, for attending this evening. With that, I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Elliott. I believe you have a presentation for us.
Yes, thank you, Ms. McKee. And good evening, everyone, and those who are listening or tuning in. This evening, we are going to be presenting the board with information about virtual Wednesdays at the elementary level. Dr. Sanko and I will be tag teaming this evening throughout the presentation. But first, I want to turn it over to Dr. Frazier, and he's going to share our administrative recommendation. Dr. Frazier.
Thanks, Dr. Elliott, and good evening, everyone. So when it comes to our administrative recommendation, there's really no doubt in my mind that what's best for our students is to continue with virtual Wednesdays at the elementary level. And so our administrative recommendation is to do just that by continuing with virtual Wednesdays, at least through the rest of the third marking period, with us then being able to reassess the situation leading up to the start of the fourth marking period, which begins on April 6th. And there are really four key points that stand out to me in making this recommendation, all of which you'll hear more about this evening from Drs. Elliott and Sanko. The first three of these reasons are really all about our students and what we consider to be best for our students. So the first of these is that our students are able to participate in small group instruction on Wednesdays. And this is how a lot of elementary instruction occurs, and it's how a lot of student learning and student growth occurs. This has really always been a fundamental truth of elementary education, and it always will be. It's just very, very difficult at best to do that given the distancing limitations that we have when we are in person. So Wednesdays are the prime time for that small group targeted instruction to occur. The second of these four reasons is that Wednesdays allow for dedicated office hours for our teachers so that the teachers can meet with individual students and meet students' individual needs through this means as well, and do so without worrying about privacy issues that once again crop up when we are in person. Third, and importantly, I don't want to understate this one because it is just a fundamental truth of K-12 education, and I would say especially elementary education. Wednesdays with the current learning dynamics that we have are the only day when there is truly a natural sense of classroom community in our classrooms. And I'm a former elementary teacher. And again, I just cannot overstate the importance of our young students truly feeling that sense of community, that sense of belonging. And again, Wednesdays are the one and only day when that naturally happens because it's the one and only day when all students are learning on the same platform. And I think that's true for all of our students. And I certainly don't want our virtual students to get lost anywhere in this conversation. We currently have 18% of our elementary students participating fully virtual. To put that a better way, we have 947 of our elementary students participating fully virtually. So again, I don't want us to lose sight. I don't want to lose sight of the needs of these 947 students. Wednesday is the one day of the week that they can be and are currently on equal footing with their classmates, and the one day of the week when they can truly get the individualized instruction that they need at that age. And I said there are 4 reasons. And this 4th reason is really more about parents and more about childcare issues. We certainly understand these childcare issues, and we certainly are empathetic to the situation that our parents are in. We know it's not easy. And that's why part of this evening's presentation will point out the champions with whom we have a longstanding relationship is currently running and is willing to continue to run and expand a full day program on Wednesdays, starting at 7 a.m. and extending through 6 p.m. for a one-day charge of $46. So if you do that math for those folks who take advantage of the full day on a Wednesday, that works out to $4.18 an hour. And importantly, with enough enrollment, the Wednesday Champions Care will be held right in each student's home school, which is important for a sense of continuity for our in-person students. So these are some of the more salient reasons behind our recommendation. There certainly are others, and Dr. Elliott and Dr. Sanko will talk through those as well this evening. And so with that, again, our recommendation is to continue with the virtual Wednesdays, at least through this 3rd marking period, and then reassess. And for our formal presentation, I will turn it back over to Dr. Elliott.
Thank you, Dr. Frazier. I'd like to paint a picture for you of what happens on virtual Wednesdays to help kind of understand what teachers are doing and what students are doing at this time. So first, one of the things that's important to understand about our virtual Wednesdays is that all of our students are attending school and engaging as learners using the same platform. So, you know, they are really, as Robert said, as Dr. Frazier said, they're a community in one environment, and the teacher doesn't need to navigate between 2 different learning environments to meet students and teach and reach them on virtual Wednesdays. Additionally, every student is attending school on virtual Wednesdays without needing to wear a mask for the full day, without needing to worry about physical distancing in the classroom. So that helps them to engage and really thinks about their health and their safety. Also on virtual Wednesdays, our elementary teachers, because all students are attending via the same platform, they are better able to differentiate based on student needs. So they can group students by need for small group instruction, meet with individual students, and it's important to kind of put this in the context of imagining where they're not having to try to meet with groups of students where some are in person and some are online at the same time, which makes it challenging. On our virtual Wednesdays as well, our teachers, as Dr. Frazier said, have dedicated office hours where they can focus on the students who need additional support. And I want to emphasize that these office hours are in addition to the small group instruction that's happening on virtual Wednesdays. So it's an opportunity for our students to get some additional individual support, clarification, some time with teachers to really help focus on their particular needs. And again, without having the, the issue of privacy with students all being in the same classroom. Additionally, on our virtual Wednesdays, it gives our counselors and our IST teachers and other support professionals additional opportunities to work with small groups and individual students so that they have some flexibility on this day to pull some of those students and work with them in the different ways that they need to provide that support. And lastly, on virtual Wednesdays, this is an opportunity where our teachers have time to meet collaboratively and review data and plan instruction. So on this day, they really are have that opportunity to, as a group, connect via grade level and really look at how students are doing, what they're learning, and really plan those next instructional steps and work together as they work as a team to navigate these challenging learning environments that they're dealing with this year. It's important too to understand the virtual Wednesdays, to think about how there are some logistical challenges when we look at the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday of the school week with our students, and how that impacts what our teachers are able to do and how our students are engaged as learners. So first, when we think about these two learning environments, as Dr. Fraser said, we have approximately 80% of our elementary students attending in person. So with all of those students attending in person, it is difficult for teachers to find spaces in their classrooms where they can safely meet with a small group of students. Additionally, the extraneous furniture in our classrooms has been removed in order to create enough space to spread desks apart and keep our students safe and our teachers safe. And so without having those extraneous pieces of furniture, it's very difficult to even find a place to meet with students. So imagine, if you will, in a traditional classroom that many of you, your students have experienced, where we have a traditional reading group where a teacher is meeting with 4 to 5 students sitting at a horseshoe table or a kidney table. So in this example, obviously the students and the teacher are not physically distanced, and they are unable to meet safely. So the challenge is that because we do not have the extraneous furniture of that horseshoe table in our classrooms, there isn't a space for a teacher to meet with a small group. And because of how the furniture in the classroom is spaced out to keep our students safe, there really isn't a place in the classroom for a teacher to even meet with a small group of students if he or she were trying to pull them away from their desks and find a space where they could all safely be 6 feet apart to meet in a small group. So it makes it very difficult. It is also challenging for our teachers to work with small groups when they are in 2 different environments. Our teachers have shared with us that students, when they try to work with students in the 2 different environments, students have a hard time hearing each other. So when small groups are meeting, part of that small group instruction is that social aspect of learning where kids are listening to each other, listening to each other read, answering each other's questions, discussing. So it's very difficult for them to hear each other. The small group also disrupts the students working in the classroom who are busy doing some independent work as the teacher is trying to talk to a screen, as well as the students that are in the classroom because they are spread apart. And the other piece is that it can be very difficult with technology issues that teachers must navigate. So in our classrooms, with the streaming equipment that we have, teachers have a setup in one location where they might have their laptop, a monitor, and they're navigating both the students who are attending virtually as well as the interactive board and the screen to provide information to all students, both those at home and those in the classroom. And to be able to meet with a small group, in most cases, they don't have the space near where all of their technology is set up to actually meet with that small group, which would mean they'd have to figure out a way to move their technology to be able to meet with that small group. And disconnecting the devices and the wires makes it very difficult and not easy for teachers to be able to quickly transition from one thing to the next. So those are some of the logistical challenges when you think about what's happening in virtual Wednesdays, and then what makes it challenging to do some of the things that our teachers are really doing to best meet students' needs on Wednesdays that are particularly difficult the other days of the week. So I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Dr. Sanko, to continue.
Thank you, Dr. Elliott. So we will continue talking about the virtual Wednesdays. And in speaking with our teachers as well as principals, We've identified benefits for our students as it relates to virtual Wednesdays. You've heard a couple times already this evening that the single learning environment creates a more inclusive classroom community for our students. And you heard both Dr. Frazier and Dr. Elliott talk about one platform allows kids to feel connected, as well as it allows our teachers to plan for and implement in one modality. Another benefit is that students are able to engage as learners, free of masks, the physical distancing requirements, and they could also engage physical movement into their day on Wednesdays, which happens to some degree currently in our building, but not like it happened prior to COVID. As you heard, teachers are able to dedicate time to meeting individual needs of students. One of the things that I would like to point out here is that it's an opportunity for teachers, another opportunity, because our staff is doing it, they are doing it every day, but it's an opportunity to meet in a confidential manner where there are not live as well as virtual students, and it provides an opportunity for the teachers as well as counselors, ISTs, to work with individuals for enrichment, extension, or remediation. The counselors and the instructional specialist use this day also to test students in person, and that is a day where obviously there are fewer students in the building. So there are some of the benefits of the virtual Wednesdays. There are some challenges with the virtual Wednesdays with regard to our students being at home. Of course, we know by observing and listening to our teachers and principals that some of our students are easily distracted when they're at home, and it makes it difficult for some of the students to fully engage. We particularly have heard a lot around our primary students when we began the virtual learning. Although we're getting better at it, it still is a challenge in some cases. Another challenge of the virtual Wednesdays is that families with elementary children have to navigate 2 different school schedules throughout the week, and that conflicts, as you all well know, with some of our families' work schedules. And then you heard earlier Dr. Frazier mention the childcare for virtual Wednesdays. Another challenge of the virtual Wednesday is that families may need to pay additional funds for childcare on Wednesdays. And we have worked very closely with Champions for many years. We have worked closely with the YMCA, and if I could just take you back several months when we began the hybrid model on September 29th, we worked with Champions to be staffed and poised to open a full day on Wednesday in each of our elementary school cafeterias. And as Dr. Frazier said, the cost of that Wednesday is $46 from 7 a.m. till 6 p.m. We also know that shortly after opening and staffing for those 10 elementary schools, that the enrollment numbers were very, very low. In fact, so low that 9 of our 10 elementary schools do not host that program now. That Wednesday program currently is housed at Richboro Elementary School, and we have had a maximum of 9 students in that program, and that is district-wide. The other point I would like to make is that our friends at the YMCA have also been very generous and accommodating. As we started with the hybrid model, they opened additional space for our families and our students, and the YMCA still, just like Champions, they still have room for our families if our families need some help with the childcare. Both Champions, as well as the YMCA, if families need assistance in terms of financial assistance, our families can work directly with Champions or the YMCA. And on that slide, there was contact information for the people the Council Rock community can contact if they have interest and want more information about that. As I mentioned, Champions was poised to offer full day Wednesday program at all 10 elementary schools. We are in constant contact with Jen Weisenbeck, the regional manager for Champions. And as you may recall, the Champions program requires that there are 2 adults on site. So again, she had 20 staff members prepared and poised to open those programs. And right now we're operating just at Richboro Elementary School, excuse me. We're operating just at Richboro Elementary School, and Champions program is prepared to reemploy and open further programs if our community has that need. Again, our maximum enrollment in that Wednesday program with regard to Champions has been between 7 and 9 students district-wide, and Champions will continue to offer the full day Wednesday program at Richboro, and will continue to expand it until such time they need to change. And again, earlier you heard Dr. Frazier talk about the cost for the Champions program is $46 a day. The YMCA cost per day is slightly higher, but if I may repeat myself, both programs invite families who need some financial assistance to work with them directly, and they will try to offer that kind of help for our school community.
So Ms. McKee, this ends our presentation of information about Virtual Wednesdays. So we'll now turn it back to you and open it to the board for questions and comments.
Thanks very much, Dr. Elliott, Dr. Sanko, and Dr. Frazier. And before going around to my board colleagues for question and comment, I just want to acknowledge the emails that we've received from community members on this topic. And just a reminder that while we do not read public comment at our committee meetings, I just want everyone who's been in touch with us to know that we have received your emails, we have read them, and most certainly take into consideration the needs of our community. So having said that, I'm looking to see if anyone has their hand raised, would like to be acknowledged with a question or comment at this time. Great, Dr. Thorward, over to you, please.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Thanks for the presentation. I have 3 aspects to this that keep coming up. One is educational, one is fiduciary, and the third is just plain old public perception. So and some of my statements blur the lines through all of those. The first is educational, and for, I don't know, decades, we've had children in class 5 days a week, and we're able to pull this off. I wrestle with a Wednesday where there are students who probably are not in front of a teacher more than an hour during the day. And if that's the case, then educationally, I wrestle with this. Fiduciarily, on a Wednesday where there's no kids in school, we're paying staff who don't have anything to do. We are. And a week ago, we had a finance budget where we were showing a deficit of 15 million, 10 million if we raise taxes 3%. So I wrestle with that as well. And both of those blur into the public perception thing. We talked about raising taxes, and now we're asking parents to pay to put their kids back in school on a Wednesday. And I sincerely wrestle with that. Sincerely. There's got to be a way we can do this where we can achieve the things that you said are pros to Wednesdays during the week while having kids in school, because I know we've done it before. I know COVID's given us some problems, but there's got to be ways to do it. And there's got to be ways that, you know, we can fully engage our staff, because we have staff members, again, that don't have anything to do on Wednesdays. And here we are. it's much like a snow day. Snow days are few and far between, unless it's this year, but that's nobody's fault but the weather. Uh, so I'm wrestling with this. So my questions are, A, is this a board decision? Do we need a vote to put kids back in school? And B, does the administration have a plan for when this is going to end? I mean, just end. No more virtual Wednesdays. I think we owe the community that, to just say, we plan on X. I don't want to revisit it in the fourth marking period, because in the fourth marking period, we're down to a few Wednesdays and then it's over. And I'm very concerned that this is going to roll into next year, and it shouldn't. So so those are my questions. Do we need to vote? Is it in the board's hand, or is it in the administration's hand? And also, is there a planned end date? I'll stop with those.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Thorber. Let me jump in here first, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Elliott to sort of talk through what a typical Wednesday looks like, virtual Wednesday, based upon the guidelines that we have. So first, yes, it's a board decision. Just like, when we started hybrid, when we went from hybrid to 4 days, secondary hybrid to 5 days, these are, in this COVID environment, definitely board decisions. So we're having this conversation this evening, presenting this information. Really, the extent of what we are providing administratively is just that, information and a recommendation and a rationale behind that recommendation. And then, as I've always said, it's our job to execute the will of the board. So we're having this conversation today. We have our next board meeting scheduled 1 week from tonight. So I would anticipate that if there's going to be a board vote soon on this topic, that board vote would take place a week from this evening. In terms of an end date, it's tough to answer. I mean, in all honesty, I can give an answer that sounds good, but I want to be genuine and say that right now, with where things are from just a virus standpoint, a pandemic standpoint, we have 18%. It's a little more than 18% of our elementary students whose parents are probably the ones making the decision to keep them at home. I certainly don't know the reasons for all that. None of us do. Will that be different when we get to April 6th, which is the beginning of the fourth marking period, or even when we start next school year? Certainly things are going to be drastically different by the time we start next school year than what they are today, but none of us can pinpoint that. So, Dr. Thorwood, I would say that we have, as a cabinet, been doing a lot of work to look at different alternative instructional models, more for the start of next school year in case they're needed. We haven't exhausted that analysis yet, but that analysis is underway, and I talked with board leadership earlier this week about that work, and we're going to try to have some broader board discussion around that once administratively we're ready to. So the goal remains the same as what it's always been, which is to get kids in school 5 days a week and do so safely. I don't think, from where I sit anyway, this isn't so much of a health and safety issue in terms of our recommendation. We're running our elementary schools Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays. The Wednesdays are nice for everyone in the sense that they can take their masks off, their face coverings off. It's also nice because we can do a little bit of a deeper clean, but the reality is we are able to, at this point, fully clean in the evening hours. So this really is more about the first piece that you spoke of to us, which is educational. We have pretty serious concerns about all kids having their needs met without having those virtual Wednesdays for the reasons that we just went through. And so perhaps, Dr. Elliott, that might be a beginning of a segue to you to talk about what Wednesdays look like from a student point of view in terms of engagement, what a typical day looks like. And certainly I want the community to know that the vast majority of our elementary employees are very much working on those Wednesdays. In some ways might be working harder. And Dr. Thorbert, I know that's certainly not what you're saying. We have a very small fraction of our folks who, just by the very nature of what they do, don't inherently have work. Now we've tried to get work for those folks to do on Wednesdays to pick up slack in certain areas. And I would also suggest that if we are able to expand the Wednesday Champions program, that we would also be interested in bringing those folks in to help with that supervision as well. As Dr. Sanko went through, we just really haven't had the interest at this point, but I wonder what could happen with a robust marketing campaign of it, and making parents as aware of that as we recently did with the food service program. So with that all said, Dr. Elliott, can you just kind of give a sense of what these Wednesdays look like?
Certainly. So the virtual Wednesday in some aspects mirrors a typical school day from a perspective of students engaging and learning in different content areas, and those content areas are spread throughout the day. So they start the day with morning meeting as a whole class, 15, 20 minutes live instruction where they're all together as a whole group with their teacher. And there'll be variability by grade level as to what order subjects are for the day, and how much time based on the grade level of the students. But they'll go into different content areas. So for example, language arts, they'll have a chunk of language arts instruction that will include live synchronous instruction with the teacher, where they'll do some whole group work, but then the teacher might break them into breakout groups, or give students some direction for some independent work while the teacher is meeting with small groups. As an example, a first grade teacher during that chunk of language arts time might have a short whole group lesson, and then meet individually with 3 separate small groups while students are working independently. They will go into math instruction, and very similarly will have whole group live instruction followed by independent work where the teacher might pull small groups, maybe work with individual students to answer questions, to meet and target students' needs to help reteach some skills or help them understand the concepts they're working on. The day will include some breaks, like a recess or a movement break, where I've been in classrooms where the teachers will actually have all the kids, give them an activity that they're going to do, give them a screen break. Some teachers will, I've been in some of the primary classrooms where the teachers will tell the kids, get away from your screen. I want you to go, you're going to go do this activity, take a break, look away from your screen, come back together, much like they would have recess in school, but just a break together. They will also have a full hour every day for lunch and a break as well. And then they'll have time for science and social studies, where again, there'll be some whole group instruction followed by some independent work. We incorporate, if you remember, WIN time, or it's an intervention time. WIN stands for what I need. And they incorporate the intervention time into the virtual Wednesdays, where they'll again do some differentiation, provide some small group support. And then they might, then after that, they'll have office hours, where it'll be time where they can work individually with students, where students will be asynchronously working, but the teachers will be meeting with individual students. And then the day ends with the teachers having their collaboration time, where they do some review and planning. It gives you kind of a broad overview of how that day functions, with a variety of synchronous, asynchronous, and small group and independent time, where the teachers are really navigating to try to touch base with all of their students and really make sure they're connecting the community together, but also connecting with those students who are virtual as well.
I'll leave it, and Robert, I'll leave this for you, and I don't need an answer tonight, but I think before this school year ends, we need to come to terms with whether or not we're going to offer this kind of educational thing in the fall. I don't think, at least me as a board member, wants this to continue in August. I don't see it working. So I'd like to make sure that the community knows early on what we're going to do and what the plan is for next year, as much as this year, because we can't keep doing virtual Wednesdays for another school year. We can't keep this up. It's not, the fact that we need it means this isn't working. So I'll leave it, but I'm going to be pushing for a plan, for the fall. So that if virtual, if there are students that want virtual prior to March, they had to sign up for cyber charters. If we're going to do it in the fall, then perhaps we need our own virtual academy or cyber charters. But we need a plan where we separate this, I think. And I don't need an answer tonight, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Dr. Thorburn. Like I said, we've started the analysis, that's the groundwork for that plan, and certainly agree with you that we need a plan, and we'll have a plan for sure.
Great. So I see some hands raised. We're going to go to Mr. Bialik, and after Mr. Bialik, Mrs. Marcel, and then Mr. Hidalgo. Please go ahead, Mr. Bialik.
Thank you. This is great information. I appreciate the time spending on this important topic in this committee, and I'm hoping to see it on the agenda for the our board meeting next week for a vote. I think it's important that we give everybody the option to be back in 5 days. And I do hear the benefits of some of the small groups and a special attention that's being paid during that time. So I'm going to ask, I'd like to ask two questions. And the first one is, how do we staff virtual only? So if we wanted to focus on just to Dr. Thorward's point, if we want to take care of the 900 and some kids that are going to be virtual, they're going to be virtual for the rest of this year, likely maybe into next year. How do we staff that? I don't remember if we've ever heard from the administration or had a conversation or a request, we need an X number of additional teachers. This is what it's going to cost. So I'd like to know how we would staff that. And maybe it is just something that we need to do, and how we need to move forward into this, because it can't be a one group of kids or another group of kids. We've got to provide the best we can for everybody. And then the second question revolves around champions, and this is a tough pill. Asking parents to pay for education in the school that they already pay taxes on for is very, very difficult, and I don't know how we would how we can offer that. So is that something we can cover? I understand that there may be opportunities for people who are in hardship cases to go to the Y, to go to champions and have their case heard. But is that something Council Rock and we as a community can step in and cover for kids who want to, parents who want to have their kids in on Wednesdays, and what would that cost be? So I'll leave it with those two questions.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Bialik. Ms. McKee, if I may.
Please do, Dr. Frazier.
So, Mr. Bialik, I'll start with the second one. I think that we would have the authority or the ability to cover those costs. Again, I think that would be a board decision as well. How much would that cost? I think what we would need to do is survey our parents to see what the interest is, regardless of who's paying. And, at that point, then be able to calculate it against those $46. And see whether that's something that is palatable to the board, to us as a district, or not. And the first piece around how would we staff a pure cyber model, we did do that work back in the fall. It's been quite a while ago, but I did share some of that detail with the board. And I can try to dig that back up again to reshare with you. Basically, what we would need to do to really have a chance to break even with it is our virtual students, instead of treating them as being in their home school only, we would need to combine virtual students across all 10 schools. We just would need that economy of scale to have any shot of not needing to add staffing. I know when we did that analysis back in the fall, even with that model, we would be adding a rather considerable headcount. I think that calculus has changed somewhat now that we have 82% of our students in person, and that's really the analysis that we've been doing and that we'll be sharing out here in the coming days, coming couple weeks. The pitfall with that model is if you're a student who's learning virtually, you probably are taught by a teacher that you don't know who's from one of the other 9 schools. You're lucky if you have 3 classmates that you might know, because again, we're combining 10 schools into one classroom. And then the question with that model becomes if we end up allowing students like we have this year to switch from virtual to in-person, now that's a really significant transition for that child. It is anyway, but especially, we're talking about changing teachers. We might be popping sections in the middle of the school year. So there's a lot to it. It's not insurmountable. Again, it's analysis that we've done and that we can do again. We are doing again, but those are just some of the considerations. And then the other piece to it is that with trying to not add headcount with having that model from a staffing standpoint, obviously our class sizes, our in-person class sizes are going to be larger, not larger per se than the class size guidelines, but larger than what they would otherwise be. Because right now we have 82% of our students who are in person at a given school. You might be dividing that across 4 teachers, but now if one of those 4 teachers needs to be teaching virtually, now we're dividing that same number of in-person students across 3 classrooms. So still within the class size guidelines, but much larger than what it would have been otherwise.
So can I just follow up on those comments? Marianne, is that okay?
Sure.
Yes, of course, please do.
Thank you. So understanding that nothing is perfect in this environment that we live in, and I understand that the kids who are virtual may not be in their home school, and I really wouldn't expect that. I guess what I would expect is teachers who are specialized and trained and adept at working in a virtual environment. I would expect that if we had a cadre of teachers who were only working virtual, then it would be a better virtual experience for everybody, rather than trying to juggle the classroom and the virtual experience and so on. So they're just my 2 comments on that. I'd like to see an update of that model so that we can try to best accommodate both situations. And then if you bring it to us and you say we need X number of teachers, and we say there's just no way that we can afford that and the board doesn't grant it, well, that's our issue, right? But that's the information I'd like to see from the administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Mrs. Marcel, and after Mrs. Marcel, Mr. Hidalgo, you're up after that.
Thank you, Ms. McKee. I had 2 questions to start with. One is, I was wondering if you could share, I don't know if it would be for Dr. Frazier, I assume so, but how long would it take if we wanted to transition to 5 days? I know when we were looking at 5 days originally, it took 6 to 8 weeks because of staffing and a number of operational things. So I just was wondering if we could just have a sense of how long you would like to have in order to make that transition.
Yeah, Ms. Marcel, I don't think we're dealing with those same dynamics that we were earlier in converting to a whole new model, and especially doing so district-wide. This is, I don't want to call it a more minor change, but it's a smaller scale change. So I don't think, there would be much in the way of lead time at all. To do this. I would love to tell you that the lead time is to the beginning of the 4th marking period, but I would just be kidding if I said that. So the reality is we can turn this one around pretty quickly. Those same dynamics that we had before just don't exist with this situation.
Okay, thank you. And then my next question, I'm not sure who's best to answer, but I was wondering if you had heard anything. I know we've received some emails, and I've had some conversations with parents kind of talking about just their experiences with doing the 4-day model. And I was just wondering if any of you had heard about, certain age groups, certain grades having an easier time with the transition between the 2 days and then the virtual day and then the 2 days following it. I've heard that younger students, and I have a kindergartner, so I see that too. I see sometimes that it's hard for them because they're out of a routine. And I was just wondering if someone could, comment on that, if there was anything to comment on.
Yeah, I'll comment on that quickly, and then I'd like for us to hear from Dr. Sanko and Dr. Elliott as well. Certainly the virtual experience is hardest on your youngest students. So I think that, is a fairly universal truth. And at the same time, it's, I think about first graders in particular. We know how critically important learning to read is in first grade, and the predominant pedagogical practice that we use for that or modality that we use is through small groups. So this is one of those where, it's 6 of one, half dozen of another, in the sense that it's hardest for our youngest kiddos to be able to just engage effectively virtually, and to learn effectively. And yet it's those same youngest students who probably most need that small group instruction. So I think there's truth in what you're saying, Mrs. Marcel, that they do struggle the most, the younger kiddos, and transitioning in, transitioning out probably do as well. And yet, at least to some extent, that's countered by right now our relative lack of ability to really engage in that small group instructional work, whether it's instructional or intervention based, that is just so critically important to student learning, student growth, student understanding, especially in those primary years where we're learning how to read. Dr. Sanko, Dr. Elliott?
So I can share too, Ms. Marcel, from the point of view of your question of grade levels that might be struggling more with the transition, echoing some of what Dr. Frazier references about our youngest students. When you think about routines and structure, our younger students definitely benefit from having that routine, and probably more so a disruption in their routine is a little bit harder for them to transition to. As a former kindergarten and first grade teacher, I can speak firsthand to how some students struggled more with others when there was an unexpected change in the school day for them. That said, I think that there are students at every grade level who struggle with that shift in the schedule each week, just as there are students at every grade level who have adapted to this schedule every week and are fine with the transition from being in person to being fully virtual. And in fact, some of them look forward to, seeing their friends all online, and there are aspects of it that they really appreciate. So while it's probably a bit more challenging for our youngest students, there are students in every grade level who struggle, but also students in every grade level who have adjusted just fine to making that transition.
And if I may, I agree with everything that Dr. Frazier and Dr. Elliott just spoke about. And I concur with everything I heard. I have had personally, I've had the opportunity to speak with a fair number of parents regarding Wednesdays, and I've had a fair number of opportunities to speak with parents live versus the virtual format. And I think what Dr. Elliott said is key, is that it impacts each student differently. And I've had conversations about the need for students to be in school on Wednesdays at the elementary level. I've had conversations with parents who have told me, as well as high school students, that they're benefiting from when they had the opportunity to be virtual. So I think it's very independent as it relates to the learner. But I do concur, particularly when you speak to the teachers of the primary students, the difficulty that our younger students are having with the virtual format.
Thank you very much. I just had just a thought when you were talking. Is there, so I know it's only been, about 2 weeks since secondary has been back 5 days, but do you know how like the middle schools might be handling small group work now that, they don't have virtual Wednesday anymore? I didn't know if they were kind of like mitigating not having that virtual day and trying to do small group in other ways.
So if that question is for me, at our middle schools, at our secondary schools, understand that we have a larger footprint and we have some large group areas where students can be broken out into those large group areas. So some of that is taking place at the middle school, but the small group guided reading by example that Dr. Elliott spoke about earlier, the kidney or the horseshoe table, that is not necessarily what it looks like all the time at the middle level in our typical classrooms. So they do have, each of our secondary schools, they do have a larger footprint and some more additional space, but they are doing the same thing we're doing at the elementary level with trying to be creative to be able to problem solve and meet the needs of the students at that level as well.
Thank you, Dr. Senko. I appreciate it. I had a few comments. One is that, I really appreciated some of the comments that I've heard so far. One is that, I think Mr. Bialik had mentioned, is there a way for the district to help families that are, struggling? And I think that in theory, that is a great idea, because we have a lot of people out of work, living paycheck to paycheck. And even though $46 for one day may not seem like a lot of money, when you add that up, that's, almost $200 a month. And that is going to cut into someone's budget, especially if only, let's say, one parent is working, or, whatever the situation is. So I just want to be sensitive to that. So I think that, we need to be sensitive to it. And I like Mr. Bialik's idea of how to help families that are struggling. But I also think about the fact that those costs, like to a certain extent, are just going to be passed to taxpayers. And so even though we are helping families, like it's still, when we're looking at a really large deficit right now, which hopefully is going to be smaller for next year, it's still, it may not be enough people that it's a big deal, but I also just think that, at the end of the day, the taxpayers are paying for it, and it's not school, it's essentially, daycare or childcare. And so I like the idea of it. And I think it's great that we have that for working parents or for parents who need that extra help. And so I definitely appreciate Champions doing that for us. And I definitely believe that we should promote it. And if anyone needs to use it, that's great. But, I really would like to see us move towards a 5-day model in the near future, so that we're not, looking at, and it doesn't have to be next week, but that we're moving towards 5 days, so that we don't necessarily have to have people who might be struggling financially, adding more to their, kind of bill, so to speak, for the month, while we're still, in this position. So anyway, that's just a thought. And then I also just wanted to mention that, a lot of parents also that I've had conversations with have just shared that while they appreciate the small group work, and they appreciate the work that's being done by the teachers on that day, that, for them, it's been almost a year, and they just want their students to be back in school in terms of a routine and a normal schedule. And so I think that for some people, regardless of what, we offer as an alternative for that day, it's gonna be a problem, for someone who just wants to see that 5 days for their particular child. And then I guess that the last thing I would add is, I like that there are benefits to it. And so if there's a way for us to make some changes, or to try to work together to improve the process overall, like I'm open to that. And certainly, if there's a way we can make it better for our virtual children and our in-person ones, then that's a win-win. And so I'm open to the, if there are ideas for it, if there are ways that we can do that. Obviously, understandably, this is hard, but if there's a way to make this better for the teachers, for everyone, I would love to do that and to go down that road. I think overall, back in December when we talked about the 4 days, to me, it seemed like it was going to be temporary as opposed to going through the end of the school year. And like I said, we don't just flip the switch, for next week. But I also just think that instead of waiting and then doing another assessment, I'd rather vote, maybe in the next few weeks or something like that. I know I shared with Dr. Frazier that I'm unable to make the meeting next week because I have a work commitment. And so I won't be at next week's meeting. I can call in probably around 8:30 or so if someone would like to do a vote then. Otherwise, if we could do a special meeting, that would be great. But I want to hear more from my board colleagues, but I just really would like to, think about all of the things that we can do and what's the best path forward. And I just wanted to thank everyone for their presentations.
Great. Before we move on to Mr. Hidalgo, I just wanted to note that I recognize we have a number of public attendees. We are happy to have you joining this, but please take note that if you raise your hand, unfortunately, we would not be able to acknowledge you or have you comment due to some unfortunate instances we have had in the past with our Zoom meetings. But we do acknowledge that we have members of the public with us tonight. By all means, continue to communicate with us through email. Over to you, Mr. Hidalgo, and anyone else who's interested in commenting or questioning, please do raise your hand. I'll get you in the queue. Mr. Hidalgo.
Thank you, Mrs. McKee, and thank you to the members of the administration, if you can hear me, for the presentation tonight. I guess I'm just going to start and continue what I've always wanted, which was to offer the maximum choices for the parents, so that they feel we're providing the choices and the way they want their children to be educated, whether that's fully virtual or in person, or a combination of the both. And I think we should offer the flexibility during the pandemic to offer that to them. And I think we're doing a pretty good job at this point of doing that. And I appreciate the administration's cooperation and the board and the community and the staff coming together to get us to where we are today. It has its ups and downs. And as we were talking about the Wednesdays that are still virtual for the primary students, we have ones who are struggling and some who have adjusted. From my experience and from some of the things that I've seen, it's great that people can adjust. It's terrible when people struggle. I see the struggles. I see some benefits for me personally to be able to have an eye into the classroom and my students, educational behaviors and things that I can do to kind of help if I have the time. So the insight is a benefit. But what I see is there's students who are still struggling when they're there at home, and some that are just absolutely adjusting well. And I think it's easier to keep your child home when they adjusted well and you feel comfortable that they're receiving the education that they need. So what I'm trying to say is I think I agree from an academic standpoint of offering the 5 days to the children who need it, and also continue to do what we're doing, which is offer the choice to stay home if you want to. So a lot of good comments from my fellow board and board members here. And I just want to say personally, I struggle because the administration came with some recommendations, and it's tough to go against the people who are running the show here. And so I have to balance those feelings and wants to go along with you guys with this personal and feelings that I have as far as providing the education for everybody equally as they want, as they see fit for themselves, because that's what they pay for. So I guess I have a few other questions that I want. I mean, I have a few questions to ask, but I mean, when Dr. Thorne, I just wanted to comment on his three things, breaking it up into academically, fiduciary responsibility, and the public perception. Those are really good. The fiduciary responsibility goes way beyond just virtual Wednesdays. We're talking a really substantial deficit here, and that's way beyond virtual Wednesdays. But academically, I see both, and I want to focus on that with my questions. And then just to comment on public perception, yeah, to ask parents to pay to have their children in the school, but not in the classroom is a wonderful solution. It actually is nice to be offered, but not everybody's going to see it that way. You know what I'm saying? So it has both sides of the coin there. But my questions focusing on the virtual Wednesdays is, I guess I'd be interested in knowing, because in this particular class that I see, it's a third grade class, fantastic teachers. They are the most amazing duo I've ever met. And they're fortunate enough in this, and thank God for Council Rock for providing two teachers. One of the reading, the specialist is with the teacher all day, and they really do a tag team effort, and that every student in that class, virtually or in person, benefits greatly by what they're doing. And, as I'm sure a lot of parents see, you're getting emails all night long. So the teachers are working fantastic, they're adapting. And so we are eventually going to have to bring the kids in 5 days a week. I just think it's natural. And we're going to adapt. And we're going to make these small sessions happen, whether you break the 6 feet or not, and figure out we're going to use the technology we invested in to make this even better than it is now. I mean, it's only been 5 months, and I think we're making headway, good headway. So my question would be, so in this case, maybe there's some classes that are just one teacher. What happens if there's only one teacher, and how much academic instructional time is being used in small groups? And I'm guessing the other students are just self-working, and how does that, how much time does that take, this small group instruction, and what do we do in the other 4 days, with small group instruction?
Mr. Hidalgo, thank you for that question. And let me see if I can give you some additional information. So first, I think the first part of your question was in a classroom where there's one teacher rather than two, like the example that you shared, what kind of small group instruction is happening. So on a virtual Wednesday, that teacher is meeting with several small groups of students for guided reading instruction, and then possibly also individual or small groups with math, additional math support after they do a whole group lesson. And in the 4 other days of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, the challenge that the teacher has is, in order to meet with a small group, as I mentioned earlier, and regardless of whether you have one teacher or two teachers, is there any space in the classroom where you can actually pull a group of students to meet with them and have them be physically distanced, which is one of the challenging things. So what that teacher is doing in his or her classroom when they're the only teacher is possibly working one-on-one with students, whether that's having a student come closer to them towards the front of the room, but still yet be socially distanced, whether it's working with students using the technology. So perhaps students are on their Chromebooks in the classroom and they're doing some independent work, and the teacher might have set up like a Google Meet or a Zoom where she might jump in and talk individually with students as they're wearing headsets. So it depends on the classroom in a couple different contexts. Number one, it depends on the space in the classroom and how that space is set up and how many desks are in there, how many students. It depends on, in some ways, what the teacher's comfort level with technology. You noted that our teachers have come a long way with their comfort level with all of this technology that they're using. So their comfort level with that. We have some teachers that have gotten very comfortable with using some breakout groups with some of our students at the elementary level, and others that are not quite as comfortable with that. So teachers are using the skill sets that they're continuing to improve by leaps and bounds in their comfort and their confidence with technology, and doing an amazing job utilizing the tools that they have. So they're capitalizing on the technology as well as the spaces that they can find in the classroom, maybe to work with a student or pull a student a little closer to work with them. And sometimes maybe a couple students, but again, it's the limitations of the space and the number of students in the classroom that kind of do dictate just how much a teacher is able to do some small group work or individual work with students when they're all in the classroom. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah. I mean, just the amount of time they spend on Wednesdays to, doing this, like, what do the students do that are virtual, that aren't in that small group? I guess they're just doing self-study. I mean, and then but how long, if they have a question, then they have to wait, I guess, right? And there's usually a backup.
That's a great question. And I'm sorry, I didn't quite answer that part for you. So a typical small group reading session or reading group in the elementary is probably anywhere from 15 to maybe 30 minutes at the most, depending again on the grade level of the students. And on virtual Wednesdays, as an example, a teacher might see 3 or 4 of those small group reading groups or guided reading groups during the language arts time on virtual Wednesdays. And while that's happening, the other students are doing some independent work. But the teachers have developed routines and procedures in the classroom for the students to ask a question if they have a question while they're working independently, whether it's raising their hand or other tools with the technology, so that the teacher knows that they might need some assistance and can get to them perhaps in between seeing a small group before she or she pulls the next group. Let me touch base with a couple of these students that have their hands up right now.
And
That's
just
fine.
quickly to piggyback on that, Mr. Hidalgo, because it is a great question. The answer that Dr. Elliott gave is really the same answer, typically non-pandemic, 5 days a week in our elementary classrooms, where you got 3 groups or 4 groups, and it's the same exact dynamic. Just now we're doing it on Wednesdays technologically, whereas this time next year, hopefully from a pandemic standpoint, we're doing the same exact thing in our classrooms. This time last year, we were doing the same thing in our classrooms. It's just now with the pandemic and the distancing health and safety concerns that's precluding us from really being able to do that, at least do that well, the 4 days a week that are in person.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's really good that we're talking about this, because I see things we have to hammer out with this, because we're going to have to learn to do the small groups in school with social distancing. And what does that mean? Because if you're 6 feet apart and there's 4 people, that's pretty much half the room. But so there's things for us to have to address and ease into, because we're just trying to do this in baby steps. I'm happy that the kids are in there, but when a student's at home and waiting to be called on, it could just be squirming in their pants and really upset. It's really tough. I mean, I know we've all seen it. You understand what I'm saying. It's just, but there's no perfect science here. I think we're doing a great job moving in the right direction, but I'm glad we're talking about it. And I think we can get this done as we move into, especially thinking about next year, which will be my last comment, which will just be, or talking about the virtual academy that Mr. Bialik was asking us to revisit and take a look at. I'm pretty much sure already, with our budgetary constraints that we're facing, that any additional costs for a virtual academy is just not going to be feasible or responsible, unless maybe the state comes up with something that they're providing that we can offshore, so to speak. So as far as, like, if we go with the virtual academy and I'll pull all the kids together from the different schools, I don't think I would like that, because when the kids I like what we're developing here. I think it's not perfect, but at least if the children decide to transition back within the same school, in same class, or back inside of school, they'll be with the same teacher in the same school. I would hope we can develop and work with what we've already committed to. And maybe that's just my first instinct right now, than to just separate everybody. I think causes a lot more trouble, as for what you were talking about, Dr. Frazier, if they decide to transition in and out. And from an economic standpoint. So I'm willing to listen to what all the options are, but I think what we're doing now is on the right track of getting the kids back into school. And it's just like the Wednesdays. I'm pretty sure we did say it would be just something like flipping a switch, I think, in previous meetings. I know you need a couple weeks probably, but all the phones and the logistics are there. I guess it would just be transportation to get the Wednesdays back and up and running. So I'm going to close with, I do struggle with the, with your desires to keep those and to address the needs of those on Wednesdays that are home virtually, the 18%. And I have to weigh that with the ones who really need to be in school 5 days a week, which I don't think I've ever not said that. If they want to go, I want to allow them to do that. So that's where I've always been, and still there. And I'm thankful that I think we're doing a good job of offering it. And I'm going to leave it there unless someone has a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hidalgo. I see that Mr. Tate has his hand raised. I don't see anyone else with their hand up. Going to you now, Mr. Tate.
Thank you, Ms. McKee. Thank you, Dr. Elliott, Dr. Senko, Dr. Fraser, for your presentation. I think it was very informative and reassuring. We've been talking a lot about the virtual Wednesdays, and as a matter of fact, I had a phone call last week with a parent who really questions the value of virtual Wednesdays and thinks it's a hardship on families. And I understand that. I understand that the value and the benefits of the virtual Wednesdays are not intuitive. They're not something we're used to, just like just about every other aspect of the past year has been. It's not education as we're used to, and it's not education as we wish it would be. And so I understand the parents' concerns. I think the presentation this evening laid out clearly the rationale and the value of the virtual Wednesdays. I'm not certain they need to continue until the end of the school year, but I'm willing to listen to the administration's recommendation. And also last Tuesday, I had the opportunity to visit an elementary school. Thank you, Mr. Solomon, for making that happen. Ed and I and Ms. Marcel went to an elementary school and got to see what's going on in the school firsthand. Of course, that was not a virtual Wednesday that we were witnessing. We got to see what's going on, and we got to hear a little bit about, firsthand the perceptions among school staff about the value of virtual Wednesdays. And one that hadn't occurred to me was the idea that Wednesdays are a mask-free day and how some kids really benefit from that. I think the small group learning is the #1 thing we heard during the visit, the value of doing that. Office hours make a lot of sense. And I didn't really understand the sense of community with classmates that Dr. Fraser talked about until afterward. I made an appointment to talk to Dr. Fraser on the phone, and he talked about that sense of community and how it's offered by virtual Wednesdays in a way that doesn't occur the other 4 days of the week, and how important that is. So, I appreciated hearing about that. There's one other thing that I'll mention, and it was an interesting example of they've already talked about it and they've already thought about when I talked to Dr. Fraser, I I asked about the idea of a virtual academy and instituting one in the coming year. And he explained to me some challenges with doing so beyond the obvious ones. I mean, to me, one of the obvious ones is it's not part of our strategic plan. We do not have in our long-range goal establishing a virtual academy. We do, I think, have every intention of making the best use of technology and online learning. But a virtual academy is not part of the plan. But there are other issues that really make introducing a virtual academy a huge challenge, and it couldn't possibly happen in the coming year. But my conversation with Dr. Fraser was reassuring in the sense that our administration, when an idea occurs to us about what might be done differently, there's a pretty good chance, and I saw this in another school district as well, there's a pretty good chance that they've already discussed it, that someone's already brought up the idea and they've already discussed it. So, you know, that's where I begin when a new idea comes forth about how we might do something differently in the district. The first thing I want to know is, has our administration already considered this idea? And if so, what are their thoughts? But I appreciate the presentations today. I absolutely do see the value in the virtual Wednesdays, and I do see the challenges for families. But for now, I'm willing to accept the administration's recommendation, the superintendent's recommendation, that we continue with virtual Wednesdays. So thank you.
Thank you. Looking through, I see Mrs. Brooks, your hand is raised. You're next, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Sanko, Dr. Fraser, Dr. Elliott, for the presentation. Thank you to my board colleagues. Excellent discussion here. I have one question, and then I just have a couple of comments. My question is not something that can be answered tonight, but I would be curious to have a conversation and see some information about how our students are achieving. How successful are we? How are they performing academically now versus what we would have expected versus previous years? So I'm certain that you can't give me any specific information about that today, but I think it's a really important contextual piece of data to have as we evaluate this, to try to understand you know, the best approach going forward. So I'll leave that there. So I do like how Dr. Thorwart started the commentary about talking about education, fiduciary, public perception. The public perception piece it was important to me because as I was coming into this meeting, I was sort of struck by how, unlike many other previous conversations that we've had, our email boxes have been pretty empty. I did not feel like I had a very good pulse on public sentiment. We have not really gotten any emails that I can recall that have actually, I'm sorry, I think there was one today, but a small number of emails saying that in favor of virtual Wednesday, a little bit more, but still a very small number of emails asking for a return to 5-day. So again, email, it doesn't necessarily mean anything to, you know, but it is an interesting, it's not like we're being pummeled with emails like we had in the past. So in my attempt to try to understand a little bit of the public perception, I reached out to 12 elementary teachers at 4 different schools across the district. And I would say probably about 20 parents of elementary students, all in Northampton. Those were where my connections were, spread out across the grades, but admittedly, definitely not a high number of kindergarten and first grade parents. So it was older. But I just wanted to have conversations. You know, nothing leading. Just I wanted to know what parents were saying, And not unlike the conversation here today, the feedback that I got was pretty divided. There were parents who said that and actually, I talked to parents who are both 100% virtual and and the 4 days. So there was a mix. But the mask-free day, the better teacher access, sleeping later, those kinds of things came in play in the conversations in terms of being in favor of the virtual Wednesdays. I heard the mix, other people who actually didn't have a preference, they could go either way. Some parents, did definitely want more a 5-day. But so that public perception is important, but the number one thing is the education. And in giving the recommendation of the administration today, Dr. Frazier said that he has serious concerns about meeting student needs if we eliminate virtual Wednesdays. When my superintendent tells me that he has serious concerns about meeting student needs, if we change to remove that, that is very compelling to me. And so the feedback that I got from teachers well supports this. The ability to have small group instruction in the elementary school is the essence of elementary school. That is how students learn. That is the best parts of the days. That is how teachers differentiate instruction. That is how teachers give students real-time feedback. And that is how socialization happens between students in the classroom. And it builds community in a different way. So when I was talking to the teachers, it was interesting to learn that some teachers reported to me that the virtual students, the 100% virtual students, seem to be more open and participate more on Wednesdays because everybody was in the same thing, that their participation and their engagement was made more difficult when they were felt more like the outsiders. One teacher said to me, Wednesdays is the only time each week where I can focus on everyone at the same time and isolate individual needs. Another teacher said, Wednesdays is the only day that I feel that 100% of my attention is reaching every child equally. Another teacher said, I can dive deeper into my teaching, morning meetings, class discussions, and have stronger connections on the social and emotional needs of students. So I understand, I can see the benefits of each of these options, but my inclination at this point is to continue down the path for the education experts who know the best way to deliver education. So I, at this point, would be in favor of the administration's recommendation.
Thank you, Mrs. Brooks. I see that Mr. Block has his hand raised. Mr. Block, up to you now.
Thank you, Ms. McKee. Appreciate the presentations tonight. It's really important to continue to reinforce the benefits of the virtual Wednesday. I want to acknowledge that the 4-day doesn't work for a certain cohort of parents, and it's just not going to. And all virtual doesn't necessarily work for anybody, even though that might be a preference, and that's frustrating. What I would say before starting to make some comments on the differentiation between 4 and 5 is, we do now have our secondary school kids back in school 5 days for those who choose to be, and elementary for 4 of 5 days. And that's a big deal. And I think that we should celebrate that we're doing that, and it seems to be going okay. And I think we should celebrate the team, the collective team, especially those in the classroom, but also those who are here, in having us been able to get there. So a big thank you to those, and let's celebrate that in the middle of a pandemic, where the CDC guidelines and some of the numbers would suggest we can't do this, that we are, and in some cases, in many cases, we're leading. So I'm proud of that. Ultimately, I'd like to get back to 5 days. I think the comments from my peers were incredibly valuable in the sense that we're open-minded to supporting some of the things that will make the existing situation easier. I also really value the recommendation of the folks that we trust and pay to run this district. And I think Ms. Brooks articulated that extremely well. So I'm not going to expound on that anymore. My big struggle with going back to 5 days sooner rather than later, aside from potentially as a board of folks who aren't experts overruling the experts, is that I don't want to further disenfranchise two groups of people. And the first is that almost 20% of the students that choose to be home, they'd rather be in school too, but for whatever reason, they're making the choice not to. And to take away the benefits to them without having a solution, I think would be a struggle for me. Additionally, taking away a mechanism in the primary schools to support our teachers and the quality of what they deliver is also a struggle to me. So having said those two things, I also want to agree with Dr. Thorwart in the sense that we can't, hopefully it'll be much different in the fall, but we can't go into the fall thinking that we're going to be in a 4-day. We have to find solutions. Those solutions need to include more review of if there still are a cohort of kids who want to be virtual, how do we support them? We certainly don't want kids going, 20% of our kids going cyber charter. It would not be financially feasible. But at the same time, we've got an opportunity to look there. And if that's a feasible solution for next year, that'd be something that I think the board would be willing to consider. Childcare seems to be a theme in the struggle around Wednesdays. And to Ms. Brooks' points, I haven't gotten a tremendous amount of email communication on this topic, but I know people are struggling. I think Mr. Bialik's suggestion was noble around helping support people on that Wednesday. But the struggle that I have there is, what do we do for the close to 20% of the people who are virtual all of the time? Do we offer them that same Wednesday champions option for free? And again, I think it just starts to become untenable. So, thinking ahead to next year, I think is important as we go into summer, but we're not in next year. We're in the here and now. I don't believe that we're going to be able to find, solutions to the challenges that our teachers face this year to be able to change the model of having to teach to the screen in the classroom. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get the teachers vaccinated, and that'll build confidence, and that parents will see that our 4-day model is working and our 5-day model in secondary is working, and more parents will feel comfortable putting their kids back in the buildings as we get towards the 4th marking period. And that, that will make it, a natural next step of what we're doing now to get back to 5 days. So my personal position on 5 days, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it this year. I also want to be cognizant of how we do that, where I defer to the experts. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Dr. Frazier, but your point of view was kind of that next marking period. I think having another discussion or two would be good. And if, rather than, and I've always said I kind of like targets, is setting a target of the 4th marking period something that we think we can pull off? Not looking for an answer tonight, maybe next week in a discussion. And then if you thought we could, I'd be happy to vote that, full well knowing if things change with the virus, that we could always back off, and we've been down that road. I don't know if that's a solution or not, but at this point, like I said, it's a struggle to do it immediately. I'd like to see it happen this year. And I will look for you and your team's leadership to find a way to get us back there, preferably in time, if not a little bit before that 4th marking period. But if it's the 4th marking period, great. And if it's, if circumstances don't permit that, then it is what it is. But certainly want to offer anything I can do in terms of, resources, and I can't speak for the board, only me, to enable us to do things that help get the folks who want 5 back, but at the same time, solve those 2 problems. Don't further disenfranchise the ones who can't be in school, and enable, ensure that in this situation, our teachers can deliver the best possible education that they can with the least amount of stress. Pulling away that Wednesday, if that makes it worse 5 days for everybody, that's not a solution, just to say that we wanted to have the 5 days. So again, that was kind of long-winded, but I appreciate the comments of my peers, appreciate your recommendation, and I will look forward to your ultimate solution to the challenge. It's not an easy one.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Before I make any comments, I did want to just check in with Mr. Salmon and see if you have any questions or comments.
Just thank you, Mrs. McKee. Just a couple comments. I've said since the beginning of this school year that teaching to two programs or 2 platforms has got to be insane. We visited a school the other day, have a lot of friends there that were open to us peeking our heads in the door and taking a look at the kids and seeing them in action. The amount of work going on at the front of the classroom is as much as the back of the classroom, and vice versa. And it continues into Wednesdays at home for these kids. I do have concerns all the way through this whole scenario. I have concerns hearing this and seeing this presentation. If you take it away, what is it going to be like? We've heard from staff members, recent emails that want the kids back in school. To Denise's point, and maybe we need to do it in the next several days if we choose to take this to a vote next week. I'd like to hear from parents that are pro virtual Wednesdays and ones that aren't, and give us a little more feedback in that sense. Looking at the champion numbers Dr. Sanko provided, it's obvious our parents have identified a place to put their kids on Wednesdays that are not in champions. So our arrangements in place that will continue for the year for these parents, I generally don't know that. This is, for me, a very tough situation because I see benefits on both sides. And for me, it's about splitting the paper down, getting some more feedback, figuring out exactly, in my mind, what works, because I do have 2 kids in elementary school and I know what to do on Wednesdays. Obviously, I'd love to have them back tomorrow on Wednesdays, but I also see the trials and tribulations of our staff that they're having. This is not a cut and dry, easy decision for any of us. The dual platforms has continued to be a problem in terms of, rolling out the Council Rock product, if you will, through the year. And my hat's off to our staff that are battling those platforms, because from everything I've heard, they've done a heck of a job. And they work late hours on a consistent basis to deliver the product they are for our kids. So I really want to just sit back and think about this. I want to talk to my colleagues offline a little more and get a sense from some parents. Please feel free to email the board or me directly or all of us. I'd love to hear some real feedback about what you think is a positive thing and what's obviously a negative thing about this. You are the customers. You deserve a right in this process, and we deserve a right to deliver what we think is the best for the kids as well. So my compliments to the team tonight for putting on a great presentation. Looking at the participant numbers, they were at 64 all in. Most of them are staff members, I believe. It's just seeing some of the names out there. I hope this gets back into our parents' area and they deliver some feedback for us. So that's kind of where I am with this. I'm not leaning either way at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Salmon. Mr. Hidalgo, I see your hand is up, and then we'll go back to Mrs. Brooks as well. Mr. Hidalgo?
Thank you, Mrs. McKee. So I guess the one question that I had that I asked that wasn't answered was, what are we doing the other 4 days when it comes to small group? And I believe that in lies the solution for the Wednesdays, because I'd like to know if when we do go back Wednesdays, even though the recommendation is not to go back 5 days a week and keep that virtual Wednesday, what does it look like? What do the other days look like? And I guess it would just look like the other days. And I think that's where the solution is. And we have to fine tune those Thursdays, Fridays, Mondays, and Tuesdays to adapt for the small group. As far as, that's just from the educational part. I understand that there's still that disconnect of feeling part of the classroom and the fluid. But I would say on Wednesdays, a lot of the kids are actually less disconnected or less connected than they would be in school. I think when I see my student home sick one day or whatever, and the students are in the classroom, the teacher's really pretty good about, the communication on that technology is pretty good with them raising their hands. And to me, I feel like he does feel like he's part of he's getting the attention that he needs from the virtual standpoint. But I guess, what are we doing with the small groups the other 4 days? That was my question.
Mr. Hidalgo, thanks for asking that, and I'll answer that for you. So it's very, very challenging for the teachers to meet with small groups of students on the other 4 days. The things that make it difficult are the fact that there isn't a space in the classroom for them to meet with a small group of students in a safe distance. So if you talk about having 4 students or 5 students, 6 feet apart from each other, that how spread out they are makes it difficult for the teacher to meet with them, plus becomes an interruption for the other students in the classroom. So it's very difficult for teachers to meet with small groups. Many teachers are not able to. There are some that are trying, but again, it's much more challenging than what it is on a Wednesday. So, the space, if the students come back 5 days, the space in the classroom is not going to change. There's going to have those same challenges to try to find ways to meet with students, and it's going to be very difficult to be able to do so.
I appreciate that. And then what about the virtual Wednesday small groups? It would be basically a breakout room on Google Classroom, and that's how they are in those small groups?
Yes, they're using breakout rooms, or the teacher will set up a Google Meet for a group of students and pull them together in a separate Google Meet. So that's the type of situation that they're using. And I think Dr. Sanko, I believe, wanted to add some additional details. Dr. Sanko?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Elliott. And Mr. Hidalgo, just to add on what Dr. Elliott said, I know that you've been in many elementary classrooms, and we talked about earlier about, just trying to illustrate for everyone that in a typical setting, you have kidney tables, you have reading corners, there are beanbag chairs, carpets are there are carpets on the floor where kids go and get into small groups. And with what Dr. Elliott spoke about earlier about the furniture being moved out of the rooms, that does not exist any longer in our elementary classroom. So when you walk in to an elementary classroom, where you would typically have a corner tucked away for kids to sit on beanbag chairs and have a small group, or go from station to station, or sit at a kidney table or a reading corner. Just the whole landscape of the room is now so much more different. It is more, when you walk into the classroom, basically what you see are student desks in rows, spaced out as we can space them the best we can, and with the teacher workstation, situated in the front of the room. I just wanted to share that with you in terms of what it looks like and how it looks a little bit different now than what it did pre-COVID.
Well, thank you, Dr. Elliott and Dr. Sanko. Really do appreciate that. And of course, Dr. Frazier, because you make a good argument. What I would like to suggest is that we have to try to maybe look at the guidelines, see how the virus evolves, and how the adolescent transmission is not there. Then the solution may be, and how do we get the kids closer together, as things get better and people are more comfortable doing that, because I don't see how we can do it small groups with 6 feet, as you said. So we'll just have to wait and see how the guidelines go and all, but and if we do go back 5 days a week, then it looks like that might be something, those small groups that we're doing on Wednesdays now would be eliminated, or we have to adjust. So I'd like to continue on that. What does that look like as we move forward and evolve, trying to get our kids back in? So I appreciate what you guys are saying, and we don't have to do this overnight. I do want to try to move in that direction, though, if we could at least investigate. And thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Hidalgo. I see Mr. Bilik's hand is up, and then Mrs. Marcel. Over to you, Mr. Bilik.
Thank you. Just for scheduling in the public. So we talked at our last board meeting about having this discussion that we're having tonight at the next education meeting, which was scheduled for 2 weeks from now. And then we moved that to tonight. And I say that just for the public's information. So I believe the reason that we moved that is that so we can have a vote at the board meeting next week. So I'd like to ask for that. I'd like it to be on the agenda next week so the board can vote however you feel about it. But then this way we get some direction from the or for the public and direction to the administration. Is that an issue for anyone? Great.
Not me.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That's all I have, Marianne. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bilik. Mrs. Marcel, I believe you're next.
Thank you, Ms. McKee. I just wanted to mention that I know a couple people have talked about how they haven't received a lot of emails from parents on this topic. And I just find that a little bit surprising, because if you go back to December, when the decision was made to move our start date from the 14th of December to January 11th for 4 days, like we had a lot of emails then. And I feel like it maybe is not as much as that time period, but there are a lot of email communications from that period of time. And so I would just maybe mention, I don't know if you would be interested, if my fellow colleagues would be interested in contacting some of the parents that were in touch with us, but I know I emailed some of them and called them. And I know that there were, some staff members that were interested, because their own children go to Council Rock. And so, they're trying to figure out their Wednesdays too. And so I guess I would just say that instead of asking more people to email, which is still great, that you might want to just go through your inbox from December, through now, and just read some of the emails, or reach out to some of the parents. And, and I have talked to some parents that do support virtual Wednesdays because it works for them. They work from home, they're able to make it work, which is wonderful for them. But, other parents, it's very challenging and it's not meeting their needs. And so, I definitely want to figure out a way to make this work the best for everyone. But I would just ask my board colleagues maybe to just, peruse your inbox a little bit to see if there are some people that might be worthwhile for you to talk with, or just read their stories. And then the other thing I would add is I feel like I'm still getting a lot of questions from people in the public about why we even did 4 days. And so, because I know when we first were hybrid, Wednesday was a cleaning day, and now it's not as much a cleaning day. But I was just wondering maybe if Dr. Fraser or someone can maybe just kind of explain that, because I feel like I tend to get that question a lot still, that there's almost like a misunderstanding of why we, tried to do days in December instead of 5. So if someone could maybe share that, I think it might be helpful for the public.
Sure. Well, I think everything that we presented this evening was all relevant and important at that time as well. I think probably a piece that had more prominence at that time was the wearing of masks and just having that mask break in the middle of the week. And certainly a lot of our students, and I'm sure a lot of our adults as well, benefit from that now. But at the time, our students in particular weren't going more than 2 days at a time with wearing a face covering all day. Teachers, of course, were in 4 days doing it, but our students weren't. So I think that was a big piece behind it. But, you know, really then, now, and any day in between, my rationale goes down to what is best for students. We're an academic institution. Our job is around teaching and learning. That's our mission. Our kids are our reason for being. And we can serve kids' learning needs, intellectual needs, especially in the primary grades. But I would make the same argument for the older kids in ways on Wednesdays right now, even though it's virtual, that we just can't do on the other days. And, you know, I appreciate hearing that we need to find a way to do this small group instruction. If someone has a way to triple our class sizes, let me know in terms of square footage, and we'll get right on it. This is obviously not an easy proposition, and I don't think anyone is pretending like it is. But you know, I'm here, and I think we're all here to do what's best for kids. And I have serious concerns from a teaching and learning standpoint with not running small groups. It is the cornerstone of elementary education. It was when we went to school, and it will be a generation, 2 generations from now. It's the way to teach numeracy and literacy, in particular, reading, writing, speaking, listening, and numeracy. And we simply aren't able to do it right now. In the fall, I have high hopes that we will be able to, because we're not going to be at the level of transmission that we are now. But the fact of the matter is, whether you go by Pennsylvania Department of Health or whether you go by CDC, we are in the substantial or the high phase, as CDC is now calling it, here in Bucks County. Even with decreasing numbers, as of right now, we are still at that level. So it's easy to say, hey, let's find a way to run these small groups. It's not so easy to do it. And so that was a concern back then. It's a concern now. I think the only piece that shifted a little bit is the mask break piece was very prominent or very paramount in the rationale back then. I still think it's relevant, but I think there are other pieces that probably take precedent over that at this point. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Mr. Block, I see your hand.
Thank you, Ms. McKee. Just, I wanted to talk about next week's meeting, back to Mark's point about procedure and a vote. I would struggle with a vote next week for a couple of reasons. Number one, with Ms. Marcel not being present, as she noted earlier. Secondly, I would struggle without, preparing for a vote without knowing what we were voted on. As examples, if we were voting to go back immediately or within the week, up or down next week, I wouldn't be in favor of that. If we are talking about something that is administratively supported, that would be a different story for me. But it seems to me like this needs a little bit more discussion. And certainly, if we're bringing it to a vote, should have the full board, especially given our ratios lately on votes, to ensure that there was an odd number of folks. But just my perspective at this point, I think we should have some more discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Let me see. Looking to see if anyone else needs to be recognized. It looks like Mr. Thorwart or Dr. Thorwart, your hand is up.
Yes, and this is just to respond to Mr. Block, then let's schedule a special meeting. That's easy. If it's not next week, let's schedule for the week after or attach it to a meeting we have the following week. That's my suggestion. Thanks.
Yeah, all depends on what we're voting on.
Thank you. Mrs. Brooks.
I was just going to say that I think it's important to have all board members present for this. So I would be opposed to next week if Ms. Marcel was not available. So thanks.
Thank you. And Mrs. Marcel, I see your hand is still up. Do you care to comment?
I was just going to mention that I would prefer a special meeting, but if I needed to call in next week, I could. It just would probably be after 8:30 in the evening.
Thank you. And Mr. Block, your hand is still raised. Further comment?
Sorry, I didn't, but I will again. I think what's important, because this is a subject that's got two pretty distinct sides and likely a split board, and I think that's okay, is that if we are going to have a vote, I think it's really important, again, that we know what we are voting on, so the public has time to weigh in prior to that vote happening, so they know what's coming. And you know, I agree with Ms. Marcel and Ms. Dr. Thorwart in the sense that a special meeting is fine. If, you know, waiting till yeah, what would that be? Next into April, certainly probably wouldn't want to do that. So a special meeting is fine, but again, we need to give the public enough lead time prior to an actual vote to know what we're discussing, as opposed to having it show up on the agenda, with them only knowing that we'll be voting on something.
Thank you. Let me see. I see Mrs. Brooks and then Mr. Bialik. Mrs. Brooks? No.
Forgive my poor Zoom etiquette and not lowering my hand. Thank you.
That's quite all right. Thank you. Mr. Bialik, I see your hand.
So I'm not sure what's unclear about what we're voting on. So the discussion tonight and the vote next week on the agenda would be, do we return, give the option for children to return 5 days, elementary kids to return 5 days. We can have full discussion, and we have a week. This is a public meeting. The information is getting out there. We have a full week before that. So I don't have the same concern. I looked back on my emails while I was listening to everyone, and we've had about a dozen emails from parents over the last week asking for 5 days, including two teachers. So the topic is certainly out there, and this is no surprise to anyone that we're talking about this, because we talked about it at our last board meeting. So it seems like having a special meeting, except for the fact that Kristen can't be there. I acknowledge that, but Kristen herself said that she can be available via phone, which I think we've all done in the past. So certainly Kristen can be represented. She can represent herself at that meeting and represent her position. But I think that if we have to go to a special meeting, then we have to do it quickly. It shouldn't wait any longer than the next week, because this is something that's affecting the kids, affecting our community, and it just can't be delayed anymore. This is a conversation we should have in public at a regular board meeting, and have people raise their hand, yes or no. So that's it. I mean, I think we know what we're voting on. The timeline might be questionable, but I think that can be part of the discussion, just like it's been with other issues, you know. So if I was voting, I'd say, let's go back as soon as possible. And if we can do it by next Wednesday, that's great. But if it needs to be as of March 15th, that's something we can talk about at the meeting. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bialik. Mrs. Marcel, did I see your hand up as well?
I actually put it back down again, but in terms of the timing, I think it makes sense probably for the board to have discussions so that whatever the motion would be could be formed. So perhaps that's something that could be, I'm not going to be at next week's meeting, but I could call in late. But I think that just the discussion to see, what type of motion potentially would be voted on and when. Like, I think that is appropriate in terms of just having a conversation for next week. But I defer to my board colleagues on that since I would be calling in late. But I think the vote could happen after in a special meeting. But if people want to have more discussion, I think we could continue from tonight, and hopefully there would be some additional feedback from parents and communications following tonight's meeting. So I think that all of that would be helpful even as we go into, next week or future meetings on this topic.
So Mrs. Marcel, if I understand you correctly, you're suggesting that at next week's board meeting, we just continue the discussion a motion and a vote would not occur at that time. Is that correct?
I'm just throwing it out there as,
Mhm.
if it seems like we might need to get the board to be kind of aligned on what the motion would be, let the public then know what that vote would be and schedule it for the future. Instead of, from my perspective, it just seems like that is how we would figure out, next steps on this. Because unless tonight, people wanted to figure out a motion, but I just don't, to me, it doesn't seem like the board is, aligned in terms of a consensus going in one direction. So I would think that maybe there would be conversation, discussion next week, and then there could, if there is consensus and a motion to be offered, that we could schedule a special meeting at that point. But if someone disagrees, certainly let me know.
Thank you. And I am going to circle back to Mr. Salmon as our board president in just a few minutes to get your thoughts on that. In the meantime, though, I see Mr. Bialik and Dr. Thorwart. To you first, Mr. Bialik.
I'm sorry for monopolizing this. So we can talk about a motion here tonight at the Education Committee meeting. It's fitting. It's a public meeting. We're not going to vote on it, but we can talk about the motion for the next meeting, whether it's at our next board meeting or a special meeting. I don't think I understand what you're saying, Kristen, but I don't, it seems like a pretty simple motion. We want to bring kids back, have the opportunity to bring the kids back into school 5 days with the virtual option remaining, just like we do with the other. So it's very similar to what's going on at middle schools. The only question really becomes the date, right? The implementation date. So I think if we can get the motion started with the date being the question, that makes sense, and we can hammer that down pretty quickly, I think, tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Thorwart.
I was going to actually echo what Mr. Bialik just said. I'll take it a little further. And the Education Committee, the meeting we're having now was scheduled for March 4th. So we're all on the hook then anyway, as far as I'm concerned, schedule wise. So this could happen then. If we need to kick the can 2 weeks, it could happen then. But I'm with Mr. Bialik. Let's raise our hands or not, come up with a motion. When we want to do this is still to be discussed, but the motion's simple. It's just when. And if it goes down, it goes down, but it's when. So the administration has said first marking period, which is in April. Part of me wrestles with that just because it's been over a year then since kids were back to a normal school week. But that's the administration's. I heard that. I don't know if it's a recommendation, but I heard that. The board can pick whatever they want, but we have options here to vote this, and should, in my mind. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I recognize you, Mrs. Brooks.
Yeah, I just would love to hear I guess, Dr. Fraser or someone from the administration's recommendation on this. I have been uncomfortable in all our conversations about return to school when the administration makes a recommendation and the board majority points us in a different direction. I don't think that served us well. So in setting up the motion, rather than us rambling about, I'd like to just know, is the administration comfortable tonight to make a recommendation of how that would be framed with a date?
I don't think I am, Ms. Brooks, only because, again, we came in this evening with the recommendation to continue with the virtual Wednesdays at least through the third marking period, with a reassessment leading up to that. Looking at the screen we have up here, we have a committee meeting on March 25th. That would seem to be a pretty good time to reassess. So that's really where my mindset was and the team's mindset was coming here this evening. So if it's agreeable to the board, if nothing else, I would appreciate the opportunity to consult with our broader cabinet team. Mr. Stone in particular needs to be consulted with from a transportation standpoint, as well as from a food service standpoint. So if it's agreeable to the board, allow us to do that as a cabinet. And then we can come back with the potential date, understanding that, again, our recommendation certainly is to continue these virtual dates until at least the fourth marking period, which, by the way, is six Wednesdays between now and the fourth marking period. So just so we can quantify that. So if that's agreeable, that would be my hope, rather than us working to a date this evening. Allow Dr. Elliott, Dr. Stanko, and I to collaborate with our broader team around what makes sense logistically.
Thank you, Dr. Frazier. That would be my preference then, to have a full conversation and plan for the motion when the administration is prepared with everything they need so that we can make a fully informed vote. Thank you.
Thank you both. Anyone else in response to Dr. Frazier's suggestion?
Yeah, I have my hand up. Mrs. McKee.
Thank you, Dr. Thorwart.
I'm personally not willing to wait till March 25th to have this discussion. So if that's what we're suggesting, I'm opposed. I'm willing to have the discussion on March 4th. We don't have to frame it tonight. Actually, I'm willing to have this discussion next week and then we can vote on it March 4th. But I'm full disclosure willing to make the motion the next meeting if we have to have that. But we need to come up with an end date here. And so I'll give you a week or two to figure that out, but we need to let the public know what that is. That's all.
Yeah, and if I may, just real quickly, Dr. Thorwart, if I wasn't clear, let me try to be more clear. My recommendation would be what your concern is, but that isn't my plan based upon what I'm hearing from the board this evening. So my plan would be to consult with the broader cabinet team either tomorrow or for early next week, and then we should be ready to discuss that motion. What that motion would be from a date standpoint, I would think 1 week from tonight.
And if you need two, I'm okay with that, but I'm not good with March 25th. That's all.
Understood. Thank
yep.
you.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Bialik?
Okay, so I appreciate this conversation. So am I hearing we're going to have conversation about this next week with some kind of direction on date? Should we set a special meeting now for the 4th, since we're going to do not have a vote next week because you can't do that, but have it the following week on March 4th? We can always cancel that meeting if we need to, but I think it's more challenging to schedule the special meeting with advertising and what we have to do.
Or we can schedule it if we're able to get to a good place next week.
Well,
We can do that too. We've done that.
Then, we want to make sure that the public's aware, going to your point, Andy, when we're going to vote on it and that we have time. So I don't think there's any harm in scheduling at this point.
Yep, and they'll know exactly what we're voting on next week, so we can schedule the meeting if we're able to get to something. There's no guarantee we will. So I guess we'll just sit on opposite sides of the ping pong table here. No worries.
Yeah, what I might suggest is, from a board and cabinet standpoint, we hold the date of March 4th. But I wouldn't want to see us spending any advertising dollars, which we do need to, obviously pay money to advertise meetings. We can allow that to happen after next week's meeting, if that would be agreeable to everyone.
Yep.
I'd prefer to have it scheduled, but I'm just one voice. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Hearing none, I assume that we are in agreement with Dr. Frazier. Any further questions, comments? Do we have an understanding of how we are proceeding?
Mary Ann, if you would, Dr. Frazier,
sure.
just go over what you're bringing to the board, just so it's clear one last time before we leave the meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mr.
Thank you.
Sullivan. So I will be bringing to the board what logistically we know as administratively we can execute. in terms of a start date, so that should there be a motion that is put on an agenda for a special meeting, whether it's on March 4th or otherwise, we have that date identified. And I don't envision any issues with being able to communicate that date to the board prior to next Thursday's meeting. So we can then, next Thursday, we will add this topic as an item for discussion, along with our other reopening and health and safety plan items for discussion. And then at that point, see if we can coalesce around whether this becomes a motion on a future agenda. And if so, if the date that we come up with is in fact that date, and then the only decision to remain at that point, Mr. Solomon, would be when is that special meeting? Is it March 4th or is it some other date? So I will aim to be back to the board with what that date could be, again, prior to next Thursday's meeting.
Yeah, and I think that's important, Dr. Fraser, that we just lay that out, so it's nothing is missed in translation there, because there's a lot of conversation back and forth. Thank
Agreed.
you as always.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments? Are we good to go ahead based on our conversation tonight? Mr. Hidalgo.
Right, okay. So basically, we're gonna have the discussion next week with the possible scheduling of a special meeting. I just recall when we talked about this before that it wasn't going to be that difficult to get the Wednesdays in. I think that's what previous discussion, and maybe I'm not recollecting correctly, but Dr. Fraser, have we not already said before that this wasn't a real big deal to flick the switch once we're back 4 days a week?
Yeah, Mr. You're correct. I said that earlier this evening as well.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate all you're doing to get this going and work with us. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hidalgo. Once again, going around the dial, any final questions or comments? Hearing none, I want to thank everyone very much for your participation tonight. This has been most helpful, and to be continued next week. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thanks, Ms.
Thank you,
McKee.
Ms. McKee. Nice work.